I've had my Steam Deck for about 5.5 months, and I absolutely adore it. Honestly, I didn't think that I would enjoy gaming on this handheld as much as I have. And honestly, I was a little bit skeptical at first. I was afraid as to whether or not this was going to be great, and if I would have that first generation adopter syndrome where everything would just fall apart as I went. So I had a pre-order that was set to go for Q2 of 2022, and I did not pull the trigger on it. I actually canceled it just as I got the notification that it was ready to ship. I didn't get this exact Steam Deck until the wait list was lifted for ordering the Steam Deck, but I wish that I had gotten this sooner. This is such a great compliment to anybody that is gaming on PC through Steam or isn't afraid to tinker with emulators and isn't afraid to just mess around with a piece of hardware. That being said, after about 5.5 months, there is the honeymoon phase that has disappeared, and there are a lot of likes that are there that I really enjoyed with my Steam Deck, but there's also some gripes that have also popped up as well, and I want to share all of that in an updated review. Let's just talk about the big elephant in the room. Yes, the battery life on this thing sucks. It's absolutely atrocious, and there is no way around that without any sort of external addition. I've seen people talk about getting power banks. I've seen people talk about just getting a long USB-C cable so that you can game either on your couch or your bed or wherever it may be and have it plugged into the wall. But that's about it, unless you're willing to adjust the graphical fidelity of the game that it is you're playing. Obviously, 2D titles, they don't have too much rendering that happens on screen, but when it comes to 3D titles or bigger AAA budget titles, that's when you're going to have a bunch of things that are happening on screen, and adjusting it from high to medium settings or even low settings will allow for not only extra frames, but also longer battery life. Now, this isn't the only way that you can do this. You can adjust the TDP, you can also adjust the frame cap, or even the hertz refresh rate of the screen on the Steam Deck itself. And this won't be a huge difference, but it will add an extra maybe 30 minutes to 60 minutes onto your gameplay session. There is also the option to turn on half rate shading, which is something that I personally do not recommend. The whole idea behind this is that it is supposed to essentially reduce the internal resolution of the textures while maintaining the actual silhouette or the accuracy of the polygons themselves. But in implementation, it is just atrocious. It is not anything that I would recommend to any game at all. It just doesn't look good, and the performance difference and the extra battery life that you get out of it is minimal, and frankly, in my opinion, it's just not worth it. That is the one thing that I just wouldn't do to extend the battery life on the Steam Deck. The screen on the Steam Deck isn't bad per se. It's just that when I go to an OLED like my LG G1, or if I'm gaming on my Nintendo Switch OLED and then I go back to my Steam Deck, there's just a lot that's left to be desired. The deeper, darker blacks that I'm used to are just not there, and it becomes much more prevalent the more that I game elsewhere and go back to the Steam Deck. The brightness that's seen on the Steam Deck though is nothing to scoff at. Honestly, it gets very bright, and overall I don't have to worry too much when I'm gaming outside, as long as it isn't in direct sunlight, which is not anything that I would recommend to anyone in Florida. But on top of that, there's also the 60 hertz refresh rate that frankly is perfect for gaming on the go. I wouldn't really necessarily expect a 144 hertz refresh rate or even 120 hertz refresh rate on the Steam Deck 2. Frankly, I would be happy if they got rid of the bezels that are around the screen themselves. I mean, guys, there's so much screen real estate that was lost on the bezels themselves. If we got an OLED screen instead of an IPS display, I'd be happy. But again, you know, beggars can't be choosers. If there's anything that I would take, it's to get rid of the bezels and have a larger screen on the handheld itself. For the controller scheme, there's an X, Y, A, and B button on the face buttons, as well as the L1, L2, R1, R2, and a D-pad with 2 analog sticks or 2 joysticks. There are also the touch pads or track pads that are there. I rarely ever use them. In fact, the times that I do use them is really more to simulate a PC experience on the go on the Steam Deck. There's also 4 rear back paddle buttons that are there. You can map those out for specific games to do specific inputs, but frankly, I personally rarely use them. This is something that is a case-by-case basis and a game-by-game basis. Obviously, this is more to customize your controller scheme for whatever game it is that you're playing. Overall, though, the buttons, they feel nice. I wish that the triggers felt a little bit more springy and less mushy, if that makes any sense. I wanted a little bit more of a responsive nature to them, and I feel like the distance that is traveled is almost a little tiny bit too big. It's not a lot. It isn't anything that is game breaking, but I just wish that it was a little bit more. You probably already know this by now, but there are 3 different options that are available for you when buying a Steam Deck. The main difference, aside from price, is the amount of internal storage on each and every single unit. You have the option for a 64 gigabyte model, a 256 gigabyte model, or a 512 gigabyte model. Personally, I went with the 256 gigabyte model, and I very quickly filled up the memory on the Steam Deck. I'm actually in the middle of saving up money so that I can buy a 1 terabyte SSD to change the internal storage on my Steam Deck. Subscribe, because I'll probably make a video on that, and you'll probably learn my likes and gripes when it comes to that. But another viable option is actually just getting a micro SD card and installing that, which is way easier than switching out your internal SSD. That being said, I haven't experienced too much of a difference in performance on games that are stored on the micro SD card in comparison to games that are stored on the internal SSD. Obviously, there might be some form of minute difference, but visually it's pretty much non-existent and plays exactly the same across the board. When it comes to the built-in audio, there's definitely a lot that's left to be desired, and don't get me wrong, it does the job. The speakers, they sound loud enough and you can articulate everything that is being projected, but when it comes down to it, I still prefer having headphones on or using a wireless set of earbuds, just because there's just more audio quality that comes across the board. Personally, if I could go wired with everything, because I'm a bit of an audiophile, I would prefer to have a wired option. So I'm glad that there's an auxiliary port that's here, so you can plug in your headphones and not have to worry about any sort of loss when it comes to your audio. Overall though, would I like something that's a little bit more pungy when I'm playing on my Steam Deck? Yeah, I would like something that's a little bit louder, has a little bit more bass and a little bit more treble, but at the end of the day, it does the job and I'm happy with what I have. I personally find the Steam Deck UI really intuitive. I like the design, I like the aesthetic, I like the way that everything feels and looks, and the same feel, look, vibe, whatever it is that you want to call it, is transitioning into other aspects of Steam as well. If you're using the Steam app on your phone, it's going to have the same look and feel. Same thing goes for the Steam client on your PC, or if you're looking on their website. Overall though, when you're controlling your Steam Deck, there's 2 main modes that most people are going to utilize. For example, 90% of people are going to utilize game mode, which is essentially what most people have seen in all of Steam Deck's advertisement. It's that UI where you see your games going across. You can also see what's great on the deck. You can see the games that are installed and their compatibility with the system itself, as well as logging into the Steam store itself and buying games straight from Steam. The other option is the desktop mode, and honestly, this is a game changer for anybody that is into tinkering, emulation, or just installing different clients on this machine. This allows for so much flexibility because this is essentially a Linux-based PC on the back end of Steam OS. And frankly, there's so much possibility with this, guys. This is the beautiful thing about this, is that you can really truly control, tinker, and mess around with this as much as you want. Overall though, I don't think many people are going to mess with this unless you really know what you're doing. But even if you do want to mess with it, there are plenty of guides that are out there online. You can just Google, and Google will show you exactly what it is that you're looking for. So honestly, guys, I think that it is absolutely phenomenal that there is a desktop mode on the Steam Deck itself. When you're going through Steam Store on the Steam Deck, you're going to see a lot of icons underneath the titles that say whether or not the game is verified, playable, unsupported, or unknown, and this will let you know whether or not a game can run properly on the Steam Deck itself. Now, for the most part, I have been able to just get all games that are running that are playable or verified. In some instances where a game is technically unsupported or unknown, sometimes you'd have to adjust the Proton that is used to run the game itself, and once I do that, I don't really have too many issues. But there are some instances where I needed to go ahead and go into desktop mode to adjust specific things so that the game could run, especially older legacy titles. But at the end of the day, you really don't have too much to worry about, if there is some form of controller support, that the game should be able to run on the Steam Deck as is. Thanks to the amazing Steam community, there are some instances where playable or unsupported titles may have custom controller layouts that are uploaded onto Steam's library. And this is really great if you want to go ahead and find something that you need to adjust or get laid out so that you can actually play some of these legacy or older titles on the Steam Deck itself. When the Steam Deck was first launched, there were plans for a Steam Deck dock, but the initial date for its release was pushed way past the initial launch of the Steam Deck. So there were third-party manufacturers that came in to fill that gap and fill that void. Personally, I don't have too much experience, but based off of what I've seen online, they were bigger, they were bulkier, but they were less expensive in comparison to the Steam Deck dock. Now, I have a Steam Deck dock myself, and I have been enjoying it. I'm using the HDMI port or the display port to connect to whichever monitor it is that I'm using, and there are multiple USB inputs that you can use to connect either a mouse or keyboard or whatever other peripheral that is supported with the Steam Deck dock. There's also an Ethernet port. That means that you can connect an Ethernet cable and have a wired connection. But overall, I am enjoying my experience using this dock, and it does the job well. I don't have a case for the Steam Deck itself, but from what I can tell, it is pretty much perfectly fit and designed for the Steam Deck as is without a case. My assumption is that if you were to get a case, you would definitely run into some issues. So you might want to consider either a third-party option or maybe see if there is some sort of adapter from the case manufacturer for the Steam Deck itself. I don't think that I need to talk too much about the games that are available here on the Steam Deck, but pretty much anything that is on Steam is essentially playable here, albeit with some caveats. You can buy games through third-party sellers like Fanatical, Green Man Gaming, or Humble, or whatever it is that you're looking for. And you can find indies, you can find AA, you can find AAA titles, whatever it is that you want, you can find, and chances are you can play it on the Steam Deck itself. I think the biggest benefit to this day when it comes to the Steam Deck is the value proposition that is there. Even if you go with the 64GB model of the Steam Deck, there's just so much value that is packed into this little machine that frankly, it just beats everything else within that price range out of the water. For $399, you're able to go ahead and play some of the largest AAA titles, even albeit for a few hours on battery or wired or connected to a PC monitor. Overall, this is something that honestly you can't beat. You really can't. There are other handhelds that are out there that do a lot more but also are much more expensive, which is where you kind of have to draw the line and see where those diminishing returns really come into play when it comes to things. Overall though, you can get this and you can upgrade either going with a microSD or an internal SSD and just game any way that you want, whether you want to go with the Steam client or if you want to go ahead and go with a third-party client or just emulate and just have fun with your retro gaming. The next thing that I have planned is to upgrade the internal SSD on the Steam Deck itself, so subscribe, that way you can go ahead and see how that plays out. But overall, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of what you think of the Steam Deck, and let me know if you have any questions. If you are interested in hearing my thoughts of the Steam Deck versus every Nintendo Switch out there, then click this video over here, and I will see you on the next one. Till next time, guys, peace.